Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 67 of The Raw Men. And today we are speaking with Gleb Tsipursky about the Pro-Truth Pledge, which is intended to reverse the tide of lies in politics. And of course, you know, I'm all about that. I got to tell you before we begin, I was just on a podcast where they interviewed me on this podcast, and just before the podcast came on, or my part of it came on, they did this thing with Jeff Sessions. So they had a recording of Jeff Sessions saying that secular people could not understand truth. And of course, I understand that, you know, that truth is typically defined as that which is concordant with reality, which means that reality itself is not the truth, but descriptions of the reality can be, if you can show that they're true. Because so that the truth is whatever statement can be shown to be true, much like facts are whatever data can be confirmed to be correct. So the truth is what the facts are. I think I have a pretty good understanding of that, and I think the reason that religious people say that I don't is because the definition of truth as I understand it undermines anything they want to assert as truth on their side. So your first name is pronounced Gleb, is it?
That's right. It's like Glenn with a B.
All right, and where do you hail from, sir?
I hail from Columbus, Ohio, which is also the home base of the Secular Student Alliance and Camp Quest, organizations to which I'm a proud donor and happily support.
How long have you been with the Secular Student Alliance?
I've been I have been a member of the Secular Student Alliance. Well, in college, I ran a Secular Student Alliance club. So I was the president of a Secular Student Alliance at New York University, the Atheists, Agnostics, and Freethinkers Club. And I've been a supporter since that time. And right now, the nonprofit which I lead, I'm the volunteer president, so no staff members. But August Brunsman, who is the executive director of the Secular Student Alliance, he's on the advisory board of the nonprofit that I lead.
Okay.
So
we
have a close alliance with him.
I had a good friend, or I have a good friend who used to work at the headquarters here in Ohio, and I was wondering if you might know her, but she was there like maybe 6 years ago.
What's her name?
Can you believe that I draw a blank? I can't even remember her YouTube name, and that's the only thing that comes. That's the first thing that comes up to my mind is the YouTube name, even though I know her real name, and yet I'm having an old man moment.
No worries. You can edit out this old man moment when you present this thing live.
I'm not going to worry about that. I'm sure she won't understand, but she'll have fun making fun of me for getting this, and then reading out how devastated she is that I couldn't remember her name in this moment.
Sure.
All right. Well, anyway, what is the Pro-Truth Pledge?
So the Pro-Truth Pledge is essentially an instrument meant to reverse the tide of lies in our political system and other political systems around the world. Democratic.
What makes you think there's a tide of lies?
Well, Oxford Dictionary chose post-truth politics as its word of the year in 2016 because of the election of Trump and the situation with Brexit. Okay. So because of the lies there. So we have, for Oxford Dictionary, which is, over 100 years old, venerable institution, to choose post-truth politics as its word of the year in 2016, that gives us a lot of indication that there's a tide of lies. Okay, and we can talk about what that means, but yeah.
I think, yeah, I'm completely down with this because this is all I deal with. I mean, it's a collection of alternative facts which are supposed to lead to an alternative reality. But from people who do not want to brace the responsibility. I mean, they understand, I think that there's a lot of people who understand certain realities, like if me and some young earth creationist were to step into a time machine and go back 10, 20,000 years or 10 or 20 million years, I think that I have a good idea of what I'm going to see when that door opens. And I think the young earth creationists, no matter what they claim to believe, I think they have a good idea what they're going to see too. And so they wouldn't get in the time machine, not because they think they're going to go back to a time before the universe existed, before God decided to say, let there be light, but because they know that when those doors open, their fable will turn out not to be true. I've seen so many admissions from advocates of theology to the effect that on some level they know that snakes don't really talk and that none of this is really real, and that all that matters doesn't really matter whether it's true. All that matters is whether you believe that it's true. So it's all pretend. And I've seen many,
Er,
many admissions of this. So while,
I
while
hear
you
what you're
may have,
saying.
while you may have done
I
it at the
hear what you're
grassroots
saying.
level, you may have plenty of people who really sincerely believe this. You've got other people who are, like I said, when it's like when people go into seminary. You know, the more you learn about this discipline, the more accolades you achieve as you study theology and so forth, the more you start figuring out that this can't be real. But then some people say that, you know what, I'm going to believe it anyway. And I've had people admit that to me too, that these may be what the facts are, but I'm going to believe this. And I'm going to believe it no matter what. Nobody can change my mind. Ah! So go ahead with your perspective as it relates to politics. And of course, we know now that our entire political system has been overrun with right-wing, young earth, creationist science denialists who say that, you know, the earth has experienced a lot in their 5,500-year history. I mean, this is part of the Trump administration who says this.
I know, it's so frustrating. Yeah, Scott Priebus, the new EPA head, says that, you know, carbon dioxide is not a major contributor of climate change. So ridiculous. I absolutely agree.
And now, then the other story that the real contributor to greenhouse gases, the #1 biggest contributor is cattle farts. When it looks like the EPA says that no, the entire collection of agriculture, it combined, all of it, livestock and everything else, in one unit, accounts for the smallest percentage of contributors to greenhouse gases. Bigger than that, of course, is industry, and biggest of all is power generation, which of course runs on fossil fuels. So let's open up some more coal mines.
That's an excuse. No, I hear you. It's very frustrating. I think you're a little bit optimistic when you think that young Earth creationists know at some level that it's not true. Because so I'm a researcher, I'm a scholar, I'm a professor at Ohio State University. I research how people think and why they think this way. My next book, which I'm currently writing, is called The Alternative to Alternative Facts, Fighting Post-Truth Politics with Behavioral Science. And there's a lot of thinking errors.
Book that long?
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's what my book agent says. She likes the first part of it. The alternative to alternative facts is what gets people's attention.
Yeah.
And then the last, fighting post-truth politics with behavioral science explains what it's actually about.
Well, that actually sounds interesting, at least to me. But then
there you go.
I believe that people fall basically into the two categories of, with regard to most things, of course, not everything, but people tend to compartmentalize. People either have a desire to understand, or they have some desperate emotional need to believe that overrides that.
That's a little bit of binary thinking from you. I think people are more of a spectrum
concerning a number of things, and people compartmentalize. I don't actually rigidly divide anybody like this. Okay. I'm just saying that I'm seeing a predominance in this case. When we're talking about religion versus science, that's where the division is. You have some.
I'm very comfortable saying with that division.
You have plenty of people who hold religious beliefs and also accept science. But when it comes to where the dividing line is, where they start rejecting science or rejecting religion, it's like, okay, they don't buy into the mythology because you can't show that it's true. And how can you improve your understanding? They just want to understand. And then, of course, this other group says, to hell with science. Those are just made up facts, and it's all just theories. I want to believe what I want to believe. And so that's the two camps. That doesn't mean that there's not anybody else, and it doesn't mean that this is the only two divisions that people have. People misunderstand me really easily, so I want to make sure that I'm clear. I will shut up and let you speak now.
No, thank you for clarifying. Yes, I agree. I think that it is the case that you have one spectrum and you have another spectrum. You have another pole in the spectrum, and there's a spectrum in between. But perhaps the poles are heavier than the people who are in between, with a larger camp. So what the research shows is that there's biases that cause us to make thinking errors. And one of these biases, it's basically a failure mode that many people go into, is called confirmation bias. And folks can look it up on Wikipedia. So there's a pretty good page on confirmation bias in Wikipedia. It talks about how we basically have blinkers that cause us to believe things based on what we have previously seen in our previous experience. So young Earth creationists may well be willing to step into, who are true believers, may well be willing to step into the time machine with you and go there. And they will, when they go out and they actually see dinosaurs, and depending on what time they land there, they might be not willing to believe their eyes and stuff like that. That happens. People are literally willing to deny the reality of their senses.
Well,
And I
that's
think when we
exactly what I
talk,
was talking about when I mentioned
yes,
that. I mean, this exact analogy I gave to this one girl on a discussion board where we were saying, if you could go back in time and find Jesus, which I don't think is possible, but let's say you could go back in time and find Jesus, witness him crucified, and watch his body rot for a week without ever reviving, would you concede then, having direct firsthand evidence, would you concede then that your belief is wrong? And she said no. She said that she hopes that her faith would be strong enough to continue to believe even when her eyes tell her otherwise. And that's why I say this is a matter of pretend.
Mhm. Yeah, there are people, I think here we have to kind of distinguish between senses and faith. People have less faith in their senses than they have in their imagination. And so this is where it gets kind of tricky. What do we consider as true? We, as reason-oriented secular people, consider the truth to be based on our senses and what we perceive. And when you say truth is what is consistent with reality, it means that, I see a thing, and this thing is going to be the thing that I believe is true because I believe in the truth of my senses. And other people say that there are higher things than senses. Now, I don't agree with them, but I perceive them and I see that that's where they're coming from. And that's a highly problematic perspective because it basically says whatever I imagine is going to be true, and then there's no way of correlating that with the truth of external reality. There's no way of communicating about the truth to other people because we can all imagine whatever we have in our heads. And that's in fact what post-truth politics is about. So Oxford Dictionary defines post-truth politics as appeals to emotions and personal beliefs over facts. And it's a situation when these appeals to what we feel, our emotions, and our personal beliefs, whatever we believe, triumph over appeals to facts, what we can actually see and perceive with our senses.
Well, I try not to rely on subjectivity. I mean, I have to accept that mine is not the only mind that exists, and I do not consider it possible, or I don't think that there's enough probability to warrant serious consideration that any of this is either the product or of my imagination or some matrix illusion or a dream of Brahma. That reality is real by definition, and even if it were that this were the matrix, within this matrix there is evidence of my past existence and of the past existence of other people within this matrix. Even if it's all false, even if the matrix is just an illusion, the evidence still exists here. So when I have evidence of what happened yesterday or what happened last year or 10,000 years ago, people should still consider that evidence, because what other option do we have? And
Yeah.
I don't want to rely only on my own senses, because I understand how I will perceive things very differently than other people. I mean, that's why I have a better taste in music than other people do. But I want to rely on objective verification, to determine where my opinion differs from the fact, because that's important. The reality matters more than whatever I want to believe. So I want to make, before I state something as true, I want to make sure that I can show that it really is true, because in my perspective, the way that I look at it, if I assert something as fact, if I say something is true, then I have a prior commitment that I can already back that up, because if somebody can show that what I said is a fact cannot be verified, it's the same thing as lying to me. So, and I'm honor bound not to make such a statement, not to make an empty assertion as if it were true. In other words, I would never say I know for a fact, which is something that it turns out I merely believe because I want to, which is what of course religious people commonly do.
A lot of people do. Yeah, there's in the definition of lie, there's the definition between a mistaken statement, which is kind of, it's false, but it's not a lie. A lie is usually described as something with deliberate intent to deceive. So there's the deliberate aspect versus simply a mistake. So people can make mistakes and people can lie with a deliberate intent to deceive. So just kind of getting on the terminology there. And
I do use that same definition where a lie includes the deliberate intent to deceive. But if you're going to describe, if you're going to state something is a fact, when it doesn't meet the definition of a fact, then that itself is a lie.
I agree with you there. Yes, if you describe something as a fact, you can be mistaken. You can have a false belief without an intent to mislead. So that's kind of where I would talk about, is that an actual lie or not? But yes, I totally hear you. And I think where a lot of people go wrong is that they don't have your probabilistic estimate. They say something is, this is definitely true, where you can say something like much more accurately. I have a 98% probability belief that this is the truth, or something like that. And that is a much more accurate statement and a much more careful and nuanced statement where you say you're honor bound. And that is the kind of stronger, much more accurate and clear perspective that's more nuanced. But there are so many people who want definitiveness rather than nuance.
Well, what I've heard from believers very often is that you have to have 100% absolute proof, right? Because if there's a 0.0001% possibility of some error that doesn't even change the course of the whole perspective, then somehow they're wholly already disproved and obviously absolutely false statement can somehow still be true.
Yeah, that's so.
I may not be absolutely right, but I'm sorry. So young Earth creationism is still absolutely wrong.
Yes, totally hear you. With going back to kind of the statement about the matrix and evidence, I think that's a very insightful statement. That in terms of we can never be 100% sure that we're not living in the matrix, but we can be 99.99999 whatever percent sure, and therefore it's just as good in reality as being sure, with that caveat that we can't ever be sure, but we can act, because in our everyday actions, how should we act? We have plenty of evidence that we are very likely living in reality, and therefore we should act as though we're living in reality, because otherwise, what does it matter?
It comes
unfortunately,
it comes down to proving something beyond reasonable doubt versus proving something beyond unreasonable doubt.
Yes, I like that. Yes, reasonable doubt. So the pro-truth pledge is meant to do something to change the tide of lies in politics. Not even doing probabilistic statements, but simple statements like, who won the actual popular election? Did Trump win the popular election as he claims, or did Hillary Clinton win it by nearly 3 million votes, as we have all the evidence currently shows?
Let me ask about that. Okay, so when Trump says like anything, he's lying about it. But I mean, by one definition, when he says that his replacement for Obamacare, for example, will make sure that everybody's covered and it'll be better coverage and it'll be cheaper, everybody will be able to afford it, and there won't be any issue with pre-existing conditions and all of that. None of that turned out to be true. Did he lie? Because when he said it, what did he mean to deceive anybody?
Well, now we know that those were absolutely in the same way that, to be fair, when Obama said that, you can keep your health care plan, when he said that in 2013, that turned out not to be true, and PolitiFact rated it as the lie of the year. PolitiFact is a prominent fact-checking organization. It's well reputable. Rated that as the lie of the year in 2013. Trump care is clearly, Trump has lied about what Trump care will involve. So yes, it's false.
So
it is a lie.
When Trump said that, we're going to call that a lie. He didn't. I don't know if he meant to deceive anybody or not, but we're going to agree that that's still a lie anyway.
Currently, we see that it is a lie. It wasn't a lie back then because we didn't know what would happen. But right now, we see that his past statements were lies.
Okay, so when he said, that during his inauguration that he had the biggest group gathered, the biggest crowd gathered for his inauguration of any group ever. And he keeps repeating that despite the photographs showing otherwise. And then when you call him out on anything, any of the many things he said, that people said, you've said this 40, 50 times, and it's absolutely not true. His defense is, well, somebody told me that. So he's standing in the rain in his inauguration, and he says that it's not raining, and his wife is standing next to him holding an umbrella, but he says that it's not raining.
Sure, that's all a lie. Yes, those are all lies.
Does he mean to deceive people, or does he have absolutely no grasp of reality whatsoever?
To the extent that we can reasonably estimate him to be a reasonable person, I mean, as long as he's not insane, yes, he is deliberately intending to deceive people.
Whether he's insane or not, whole different discussion, and I'm afraid that's not going to be down to us. We have our opinions. I have mine.
Fair enough, fair enough. But his actions are show a deliberate intent to deceive. So yes, those are all lies.
Yeah. To be fair, now you said that Obama told the lie of the year in 2015. Yes. I mean, during the presidential primaries, we had a comparison between Donald Trump saying that he met Putin in Moscow on a TV show and that they had a great relationship.
Yeah.
And then later he said that he never met Putin. He had no relationship with Putin and had never been to Russia. You would remember if you had been to Russia.
If you met Putin. Yes.
I'm thinking you would, if you met a leader of a world superpower, maybe that would stick in your mind.
Hopefully so, right?
So hopefully that's a little bit bigger information than just having a lapse of memory on what was my friend's name that used to work at that office.
Exactly.
It's a little bit bigger than that. At the same time though, we had Hillary saying that she had to duck and cover under sniper fire when the footage shows. So we know we got liars on both sides, and I'm happy to accept that both sides lied. The thing that gets me is that a lot of people were saying at the same time that Bernie Sanders lied more than anybody, and yet nobody can show a single statement Bernie made that could qualify as a lie in the capacity or compared to either of these other examples or many others that I could say for Trump.
Yeah, I think the only things with Bernie were exaggerations and not direct lies. So if I'm remembering correctly, the fact-checking organizations, they found that Trump's lies were way out of proportion to any other candidates. So, for example, Washington Post has a well-known fact-checking column, and it found that Trump's lies, he had of their evaluations, he had something like 4 Pinocchios, which is their worst rating, about 60% of the time, whereas a typical candidate had something 4 Pinocchios between 10 to 20% of the time, and Hillary Clinton had something like 15%. So
is this a comparison between fibs and pants on fire?
No, I mean, the 4 Pinocchios were the worst. So PolitiFact has the pants on fire, and Washington Post has 4 Pinocchios as their worst rating. And so Trump got 4 Pinocchios 60% of the time. Clinton got 4 Pinocchios something like 15% of the time. I don't remember Bernie Sanders.
All right, well, let me ask you about another one. Since we're talking about lies in politics and what constitutes a lie and so forth, it occurs to me that some politicians have no concept of the moral compass that many of the rest of us have to live under. And I'll give you an example of that. I live in Texas, so for the longest time we had Governor Rick Perry. And here's a man that struck me as having absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. He had more prisoners executed, hundreds of prisoners executed during his term. And he had more prisoners executed, twice as many than the next most lethal state with the death penalty. So he's killed twice as many people as any other state. And at least in one of those cases, the prisoner had already been exonerated and the governor ordered him to be executed anyway.
Jeez.
So we know for certain that that prisoner is innocent. and Perry still had him killed. And then on top of that, man, there's so many things that were wrong with this president. Like when his chemical companies or his there were chemical plants that weren't passing inspection, so he deregulated them so they wouldn't be inspected anymore. And then consequently, 2 of them exploded. One of which exploded in a suburban neighborhood. So now we've got some casualties here. And so there's certainly a moral perspective. But then the example that I want to mention is one of the more trivial of all of these, is when he was in a presidential debate, when he said that, I think it was the same debate where he said he wanted to abolish the department that he is now in charge of.
Yeah.
If he could only remember the name of the department, because this is the one he didn't remember the name of.
Oh, he couldn't forget it. Yeah.
Yeah. But he said then, I think it was that same debate where he said that he can be bribed, but he's expensive. So his bragging point is that it takes quite a lot of money to bribe him. He doesn't understand that there's a moral issue, that you're not supposed to take bribes at all, that you're supposed to have integrity, that you would never do such a thing, much less brag about it during a presidential debate.
Yeah.
So
he has, he doesn't. Politicians, very many politicians don't have moral integrity. They don't have a moral compass.
We have another politician who is convicted of sexually molesting a 4-year-old. And his excuse is that she initiated it.
You're kidding me. That's ridiculous and so sad. That's so ridiculous and sad. Wow.
And then you have another one who was criminalizing, because it's a moral issue, and then they are the moral majority, right? So they want to take family issues and protect the children and all like this. So they have this one politician, and again, I'm having a senior moment. I can't remember this guy's name either, but he was penalizing heavily child molestation and all of that. Okay, understandable, but then he's convicted of it himself.
Oh man.
And then not only is there an issue with hypocrisy, which these people also don't seem to understand, but suddenly all of the very people who are standing behind him being this moral majority leader and protecting the children, they're all suddenly screaming for him to have a more lenient sentence. Why? Why should the hypocrite be granted more leniency than an average person?
Forgives, right? Yeah.
Why shouldn't he be penalized more? Just for the hypocrisy.
Well, it's like that Dungeons and Dragons joke. Jesus saves, you take half damage.
Okay, a bit of a nerd moment there.
Yes, I had a nerd moment. But so this is why we need some kind of institution to address lies in politics. Politicians don't have incentives to not lie. They don't have an inherent moral compass. I mean, you think about the people who go to become politicians, they're not the people of the best character. I'm really glad.
I'm running for.
I'm really glad. I'm really glad that you're running for state senate. So that's great. But we don't have nearly as many people of good character running for politics as we would like that to be the case. And there's many reasons for it. But basically, politics is a business that doesn't inherently attract moral people who want to go.
I have to agree with you there, because politics is not something that I ever sought to do as a career. I honestly decided to become involved in it because I've seen such incompetence and moral duplicity in the political spectrum that the only way to override that is to simply be part of it and to try to correct it from within.
And I really appreciate that you're doing that and you're taking on that heavy burden. I mean, it's very effortful. So, but most people don't go into politics from your perspective to change things. They go into it to have a career. And those people who go into it to have a career generally don't have as strong a sense of moral compass as people who don't go into politics for clear reasons. There's something called survivorship bias, which is another fallacy. So basically, people who survive to get to the top level of politics, the higher people go, the less of a moral compass they tend to have, because a lot of people who are idealistic go into the lower levels of politics, but then the people who are
hold on. Gleb, I lost your audio. Your audio went out. Can you hear me? It seems our audio went out for both of us. Yeah, I can't, obviously you can't hear me. And I can't hear you either. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes. I don't know what happened. I've never seen that before. It's while you were talking, suddenly there's no sound.
Weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can you remember where you were? And I'll just
Yes, I can
I'll
talk
just edit
about.
this
I can talk
together.
about the incentives for politicians. Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Cool. Yep. So the problem for politicians and moral compass is that the people who go into politics are not the most moral people, right? It's very unfortunate, but it is true. And there's a phenomenon called survivorship bias. And the survivorship bias basically refers to the fact that we see the people who survive, we don't see the people who didn't. So there are lots of people who go into politics for moral reasons. And once they get into politics, for good reasons, actually, lots of good people. But once they get into politics, who proceeds up the chain? Who proceeds up the ladder? It's the people who can play the political game best, who are oriented towards staying in it for the long term, for the career, and because of various incentives and social groups. So how do we fix this problem? Because the people who survive are not the good people, usually, who go up the chain of command. There are very few exceptions, people like Bernie Sanders, and that's on the liberal side. On the conservative side, I like John McCain. I think he's pretty good, and many things that he says, are pretty honest. But they are the exceptions to the rule as opposed to the rule. So how do we fix this problem? Well, we need to create incentives for politicians to not lie, and other public figures. Politicians to not lie, other public figures to not lie, and to instead tell the truth, to not deceive us. Now, we need to change the incentives. We need to change the game, calling out individual politicians just for lying. Because just calling them out doesn't work. That's what post-truth politics is about. That's why Oxford Dictionary chose that word. We see politicians winning with lies. They attack the media. They double down on their lies. They don't back away from their lies when they're caught lying. It's an incredibly unfortunate situation. So the post-truth pledge at posttruthpledge.org is a way to change the incentives for media figures, for public commentators, for everyone who is a public figure to take the pledge and stick to it, and especially for politicians and other public officials.
So you're saying I'm going to be corrupted by power? So you're saying I'm likely to be corrupted by power?
I'm saying that you're likely to not rise up in the state legislature. So people, it's not about power corrupting. It's about how likely are you to actually rise up in the rankings of politics if all the people around you are, not, they are playing the game and you're not playing the game.
Gotcha. Yeah. So what is this pledge? Is this something that you can summarize?
Sure. So the Pro-Truth Pledge has 13 behaviors that research on this topic, so science-oriented behaviors. We've done a lot of research. I'm a researcher on this topic. There are a number of other researchers who found what are the behaviors that are most associated with the truth. It's very aligned with the scientific method and kind of describes the kind of behaviors that are oriented toward the scientific method. So things like sharing true information, and we can talk about what it defines as true information, despite it not fitting your goals, and avoiding sharing misinformation, even if the misinformation fits your goals. Whenever you share information, sharing your sources, where did you get that information? Verifying the information, what you said before, whether it's a fact or not, rather than just stating it, and having clear ways that you state it. If someone challenges you on the information and you can't provide evidence, you want to retract your statements. You want to trust the opinions of people who have a greater expertise in a certain domain than you. So having more credibility for them. Trust climate scientists as opposed to politicians on whether there's climate science and stuff like that. Then celebrate people and positively reinforce them for retracting their statements and updating their beliefs and changing their minds. So all of those things are what constitute the pledge. And we want as many people as possible to take the pledge. The goal is for as many people as possible to take the pledge in order to incentivize politicians and other public figures to take the pledge, and we can talk about how that works. But that is what the pledge is about in a very nutshell, short summary.
Okay, and this reminds me of something else. When you talk about the playing of the game, right? And you want to
Yes.
celebrate people for taking these honorable steps. Now,
Yes.
People who know me know that I don't have a whole lot of love for Hillary Clinton. I have nothing but disdain for Donald Trump. But okay, I don't have a lot of love for Hillary Clinton. However, one of the things that she was frequently criticized for was flip-flopping on her positions. And this is a point actually where I give her credit, because she made a statement for which she was criticized, where she said that she has a public persona and a personal persona. And people thought that that was a bad thing. Well, I understand that you have your own perspective, your own opinions. But and she described this. I mean, so she says that on a personal level, she is against gay marriage, for example. She understands that as a representative of the public, the public, and I don't know if she actually came out and said this, or if this was just just evident in figures. The public polls showed that the overwhelming majority of people in this country wanted gay marriage to be legal, and so that homosexuals had equal rights with the rest of us. Okay, fine. So she may personally have an objection to gay marriage, but she's going to support it anyway because she's a representative of the people. Now, this, I think, if you're going to represent the majority, your opinions, and this is something I strongly advocate. Your opinions should not override what your capacity of representing the populace. And for another example, I mean, I say very often that what people advocate for in their political officials, they want to make sure that they elect somebody religious because they want somebody who is strong in their beliefs and firm in their convictions. But if that's what you've elected, either as somebody to govern over you or judge you, then that person has already made their determination and will not change their mind in light of any evidence or testimony that you may bring. So what you're electing is an unreasonable person.
You're absolutely right.
I should be expected that even where my opinion is one thing, and let's hope that this is not something that is going to be. I mean, obviously there's going to be limits where I can't, where 50,000 people can be wrong if the facts don't back them up, or if I can see that there's a moral dilemma that must be dealt with, whatever. I can't argue any specifics because we don't have any to come up yet. But I'm going to try my best to hear evidence, to consider the possibility that my opinion may be wrong. And a lot of people think, well, opinions can't be wrong. Yes, I've seen many times that opinions have been wrong. So, and my opinions, my own opinions, I've experienced in the past where my opinions have been wrong, and I've had to correct them. So I'm going to be open to the possibility that that could still happen. And this is the only way to govern fairly and wisely, I think.
I absolutely agree with that sentiment. I think there's a very inappropriate criticism of flip-flopping in this country. I think is essentially changing your mind based on evidence. And instead of criticizing it, we should be celebrating it. We should be praising people who flip-flop according to the evidence, who evaluate the evidence and see that it doesn't point to where they previously thought, or new evidence comes up that's different than what they previously thought, and change their minds based on this evidence, reasonably so. That's what being reasonable means. So definitely one of the 13 tenets of the Pro-Truth Pledge is to celebrate updating in order to change, both have truth-oriented behaviors and help change the culture in this country to encourage updating. And we don't want to play any gotcha games. When, let's say, you take the pledge as both a public figure who's the podcast show host and a candidate for the state senate in Texas. If you say something that's a mistake, we're not going to come and say, oh, now that's terrible, R&R is bad. No, it's going to be a private kind of conversation saying, hey, we've noticed that this may be not factual. Can you clarify what's going on here?
Well, that may be what your intent is, but you've obviously never read YouTube comments.
I'm talking about what people who do the pro-truth pledge would. So anyone who signs a pro-truth pledge, a private citizen, has an opportunity to help with the pro-truth pledge. One of the ways they can help with the pro-truth pledge is by monitoring public figures. I'm a public figure. I took the pro-truth pledge. You can choose to if you wish to, Aaron. And there are a number of secular podcasts who did, like, let's say, No Legends has taken the pro-truth pledge and plenty of others. So if they say something that is not in accordance with reality, they don't intend to do so. They don't intend to deliberately deceive. So people will approach them and say, hey, what's going on here? I think you said something that doesn't accord with reality. Can you clarify your statements and so on? And Legends retracts his statement. That's great. And we celebrate his updating, and we send out, kind of information saying, hey, No Legends did a great job by retracting his statement. Wonderful. Kind of encouraging such updating and such changing of beliefs as opposed to punishing them. This is a big problem in our current society. When people change their minds, there's a gotcha game. There's like, oh, you're a bad person because you said something that was wrong, and now you have to withdraw it. And there's there's criticism around that, as opposed to positivity, saying, great job, you acknowledged you said something wrong, and then you changed your mind and you retracted that statement. That's such
one of my
better culture.
That's one of my favorite quotes from Carl Sagan, where he says that, it very often happens in science that people would say that, what, your argument is correct and my position is wrong. And that scientist would never repeat that same error again. And as Sagan put it, he says, I cannot recall when that has ever happened in religion or in politics. So you've got a very good point there. And I want to comment also that there was an article on Trump recently where the article said that Trump had admitted that the job of president was harder than he thought it would be, or that it was more difficult or more demanding. I don't remember how they phrased it, but I thought, Trump is admitting that he'd made a mistake going into this, and that he needs to address this more seriously. I'm like, I actually respect, this is the first time ever that I actually respected something that Donald Trump said. So I went and looked for the exact quote. No, he didn't admit that he needed to be more serious, or that he made a mistake in his estimate. Instead, he blamed the presidency and criticized the Constitution and the American government system, saying it's all archaic and needs to be streamlined more like a dictatorship.
Wow.
So Trump is never admitting that he made a mistake on any, and that's something that pisses me off more than anything in the world, when people will not own their mistakes. If you tell me I was wrong, I'm going to forgive so much and begin working from that point. But if you can't do that, if we all have all the evidence we need right there, you said this thing, this was wrong, admit this thing was wrong, and if you want that, you have no credibility, you have no accountability, if you have no defense, if there's no way to show that you could still honestly hold this position. No, if you're just being defensive and you won't admit your mistakes, I can't trust you. So
that's why I'm so glad that you're running for public office. We need much more of that in public office. This is the kind of attitude we need, and this is what the Pro-Truth Pledge is trying to bring to public office. Unfortunately, people who have your attitude aren't inherently likely to succeed in public office because of that attitude, because currently politics militates against that attitude. It goes for sound bites. It goes for people being convincing, being fake, having an appearance of truth, what John Colbert called truthiness, as opposed to actual truth. And that's what we need to change, because that's the kind of situation that would lead to a greater cycle of lies and deceptions. Trump is definitely a post-truth politician, as are a number of people who won in Brexit, the Leave side, which is why Oxford Dictionary, because of those two events, chose post-truth politics as its word of the year in 2016. Because of these victories, other politicians are currently adopting these tactics. It's very unfortunate, but effectiveness, nothing succeeds like success, right? So effective tactics are going to be followed. And this is something that will result in a cycle of deception, more and more and more. unless we do something about it. This is why we're coming together around the pro-truth pledge to change the incentives for politicians. And it has clear incentives for both people who are oriented, who sign the pledge, and for people who don't. So for people who sign the pledge, for politicians, for media figures, podcast hosts, whatever, journalists, commentators, they can have a paragraph of why they signed the pro-truth pledge and free links to anything they wish to be sent around to the people who signed the pro-truth pledge, all the people. So this is why we want as many people as possible to sign the pro-truth pledge, ordinary citizens, because that gives politicians and other media figures incentives to sign the pro-truth pledge. The more people we have on the list of email list, the more incentives they have, because once they sign the pro-truth pledge, a paragraph about why they signed it and their links goes out to everyone who signed the pro-truth pledge and also subscribed to the updates. When you sign the pro-truth pledge, any listener of the show doesn't have to subscribe to the updates, but hopefully you will, the listener, will subscribe to the updates, and this paragraph will go out to all the people who subscribe to it, so that, let's say, there are, podcast hosts will know who the credible podcast hosts are, the people who signed the pro-truth pledge, and they'll get more of an audience than the people who didn't. Same thing for journalists, same thing for politicians. So the more honest politicians will get more of an audience, and they'll get supporters.
Do you have to be part of this network to notice or to know who signed or who didn't? I mean, is there a link that each individual person can put up to say, look, I signed this and here's my link?
So the pro-truth pledge, the pro-truth pledge, so you can be part of the network, that's one. Second, the pro-truth pledge has a website seal. So it's on the blog, it's on the last page of the pro-truth pledge. After the pro-truth pledge is signed, there's a link to put a website seal on your website saying, I signed the pro-truth pledge, please hold me accountable. If anyone wants to check it out, it's on my website at glebtsipursky.com/about. On the bottom of that. So I signed the pro-truth pledge, it's there. A number of other people who signed it, who are public figures, also have it on their website. That's one. Second of all, we will have a database we're putting up together right now, creating a database to be eventually put up on the pro-truth pledge website itself of public figures who have signed it and when they have signed it. The benefit of having when they signed it is that if a public figure signed the pro-truth pledge, let's say 5 years ago. So they have been 5 years committed to the pro-truth pledge, and they have been credible and honest for that time. Now, they might have been credible and honest before then, but we have a monitoring and evaluating system that ensures that people are credible and honest. And we can talk about how that works, but that's basically gives you more credibility and honesty the longer you are in the pro-truth pledge.
I want to talk about how that works, because I can hear the typewriters now, or the keyboards now, the typewriters. That shows how old I am, right? But there's people I know that have been listening to this saying that, well, how would this hold anybody accountable? Everybody says, well, I'm honest and truthful, and I kiss babies, so that shows that I'm for family and all that. So how would that actually hold people accountable? Let me know what the mechanism is.
Yep. So anyone who signs the pro-truth pledge can also choose to help with the pro-truth pledge. There are a number of ways to help, and they include contributing time. I mean, they include contributing money, because this all needs money to run. They also include contributing time, being a volunteer. Now, one of the things you can do as a volunteer is promoting the pro-truth pledge. Another is lobbying public figures to take the pro-truth pledge. A third is evaluating and monitoring public figures to take the pro-truth pledge. So there are a number of people who know that I took the pro-truth pledge and who are listening to this show right now and are listening to make sure that what I say is in accordance with the truth, with reality. And so there are a number of people who evaluate and monitor everyone who chooses to take the pro-truth pledge, and they evaluate their statements to make sure they're honest. Now, if what they say, if they hear a statement that I make that's not honest, let's say I say, for example, that 3 and 3 is 5 for some dumb reason, I say that, or something like that. Or I say that Donald Trump won the popular vote, something like that. That's objectively, demonstrably wrong. And there are 3 ways that we know that something's wrong. 3 ways. One is if something is a blatant lie, like I said, 3 + 3 = 5. Two is if a credible, reliable fact-checking website disagrees with that statement. Now, in order to not be accused of political bias and to not have to do this, evaluation, we basically outsource the job of evaluating to Facebook. So Facebook has a number of websites that it works with to check on its fake news, and it has a huge financial interest in making sure that these websites are credible. So we are basically using whatever websites Facebook chooses to use as its organizations, the fact-checking organizations, we're using the same ones. And third is the scientific consensus. So whatever the scientific consensus says on public policy, if there is a scientific consensus, we use that. So things like, let's say, climate change. Climate change, human-caused climate change is definitely happening according to the scientific consensus. Over 97% of climate change scientists agree on that. So that's a scientific consensus. Same thing for vaccines. Vaccines do not cause autism, according to the scientific consensus. And again, I mentioned two things. One is a conservative problem. Many more conservatives than liberals think that climate change is not caused by human beings. And many more liberals think that vaccines cause autism. In both cases, the science is against them. So we consider those misinformation.
Okay, well, I've got two things that I've got to bring up then,
sure.
Because there's common misperceptions. For one thing, I recently discovered I went to the Texas State Capitol and I testified before the House Committee on Education, wherein I was surprised to find out that many of the people on the committee and other people giving testimony had no idea what a scientific consensus is. They literally confused it with religious heresy. That you are, I'm not kidding. They think that the scientific consensus is where you have some pact to agree with or support what the powers that be tell you that you have to believe or promote, which is, science works exactly opposite of religion. That's what religion does. Science does something completely different. A scientific consensus means not just that the leaders of all these scientific organizations agree, and so you must shake your hand and promise to promote that. Instead, it's that all of the data from all of these independent studies from many different fields unify to the same conclusion. It's the data. Okay, so the scientific consensus is that all of these studies, all of the studies support this conclusion, and the only contentions against that conclusion are unreliable, unverifiable, crackpot nonsense that can't be substantiated even enough to be evaluated. That's what a scientific consensus is, where all the data indicates this and nothing indicates otherwise. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing that can pass, that can be verified, or that can survive critical analysis and peer review. Nothing that anybody can say, you know what, there's substance here, and here's what it is, and can show other people. Because I mean, if there is substance against climate change or against evolution, I make this challenge all the time. People tell me, "Oh, we've got evidence of creationism." No, you don't. But you're welcome to try and spit out whatever you think you got. And the fact that you used to be addicted to cocaine is not an indication of creationism, right? The fact that somebody that you think somebody that was once an atheist, now claims to be a believer, that's not evidence of creationism either. You have to show me an objectively verifiable fact, which is either positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with that conclusion over any other, and that fact has to be verified by other scientists, so that other scientists will say, you know what, it was just like we were talking about before. I used to hold this position, and then I found this, and you know what, this is correct. We've checked the math, and then it spreads. But that is not what we get with creationism. For the last 100 years, we've had creationists saying that that more and more scientists agree with it. No, less and less. It's exactly the opposite. So then that was just a scientific consensus then. Then the other thing we need to talk about is credible, reliable website who disagrees with that. Well, on the same point, we don't, it doesn't matter that somebody disagrees, because people will disagree for many reasons. But what matters is the reason that they disagree. If I look for, if I look up something on PolitiFact, for example, and PolitiFact says that, you know, X politician made this statement, and we show this to be false. That's not enough for me. The fact that you say that that's false doesn't matter. How do you know that's false? That's what matters. You know, and like the thing about, you know, Trump. Did Trump meet Putin? Did Trump have a relationship with Putin? Did Trump go to Russia? How do we know that was a lie? Right? Well, because there's this other statement that he made previously, so that maybe he was being honest this later time, but that means that he lied the first time. One of these two is a lie. You know, because it can't both be true. So that's the reason behind that. All right, so I've talked way too much over this interview, and I know that there's
no. This is an important thing. So I will briefly respond to the scientific consensus. So there are three things that scientists use to measure scientific consensus. One is surveys of scientists who work in the field. That's why I used the example of 97% of scientists who work on climate change, on climate science, believe that there's human-caused climate change. So we consider over 90% of scientists to be scientific consensus.
And that 3%, we got to talk about that too, because we know that the Republican Party is the only major political party on earth who denies anthropogenic climate change. And the reason that they do is because they're holding to the fossil fuel industry. Or there's an alternate reason. They're holding to religious beliefs in which they want to be able to deny responsibility for anything that they do, so that they can waste all, they can do like Ann Coulter said, where she says that the gas-guzzling SUV is the biblical way, that you're supposed to dominate and subdue and what is it, I forget, you know, you're supposed to just take over the planet and use and abuse everything to your own needs. And it doesn't matter how many souls we bring unto the Lord. It doesn't matter if there's any resources and everybody's going to starve, but we've chewed up and burned up everything. And there is literally no future for us anymore, because we're going to pretend that the magical sky daddy will come down and save us from our own irresponsibility. This seems to be in line with the whole denial of climate change, because, you know, humans can't affect the environment. Yes, obviously we can. And it takes, I mean, you have to be incredibly obtuse not to realize that the industrial capacity that we have, if we can produce a glob of garbage in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that is the size of a continent, then yes, we can affect the environment. So there are reasons that people hold to these biases, and again, you know, the reasons matter. So this 3% of scientists aren't holding this alternate opinion because they have secret knowledge that they won't share. It's that the knowledge that they have, or the claims that they make, don't substantiate as knowledge, and can't convince any rational person who is not holding to the fossil fuel industry, or doesn't have a previous religious indoctrination to colorize their thinking.
I absolutely agree. So yes, this is why kind of, you know, we do the 90% of scientists, which is, again, that's very what the scientific consensus usually amounts to. So that's one. Second is statements by prestigious associations, you know, like let's say the American Medical Association and so on, which combine the science and something and say, here's what the science is, here's what it says. That's two. And three is meta-analysis studies. So meta-analysis studies are studies of studies. So when they combine a number of studies and say, here are what the good studies say, here's what the studies and the methodology say, you know, and with the quality methodology. So those are three indicators of the scientific consensus. Areas where that's lacking are not areas that have scientific consensus. That's one. And yeah, on PolitiFact and so on, you can always go into the depth of an analysis, a report that explains why it's credible or not credible or something like that. So that we use the organizations that Facebook works with because they have good processes and they have credible processes.
I made the mistake in the beginning of this interview, and I asked you where you hail from. You said that you're in Ohio and you're working for the Secular Student Alliance, but I didn't ask you if there's anything else about your background that might be relevant to this situation. I mean, you mentioned previous books and so forth. So could you please just flesh out who you are and where you're coming from that I should have done at the beginning of the interview. I apologize.
No worries. Sure, no worries. So I'm a professor at Ohio State University, or the Ohio State University, as I'm legally obligated to call it, and I'm also contractually obligated to root for the Buckeyes, so go Bucks. So I'm a professor there. I study the history of behavioral science, specializing in business and politics and decision-making in those fields, why people make decisions as they do. I wrote several books, including Find Your Purpose Using Science, Socialist Fun, Youth Consumption and State-Sponsored Culture in the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1970, and some other stuff. I appear regularly on TV, radio, podcasts, and so on. I publish in Time, Scientific American, Psychology Today, Skeptical Inquirer, The Humanist, Free Inquiry, a whole bunch of magazines and so on. I run Intentional Insights. Well, I help run Intentional Insights. So there's a great group of people who run it. So I'm the volunteer president of the nonprofit. And the nonprofit is dedicated to promoting decision-making and emotional and social intelligence for reason-oriented people. As I mentioned, I'm writing a book called The Alternative to Alternative Facts, Fighting Post-Truth to Politics with Behavioral Science. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
Well, that I think is enough to set.
Well,
there's a lot of people that watch these type of interviews, and they look at credentials probably more than the substance, which is unfortunate. But for those people, I think you've satisfied most of the requirements. Prior to my asking, you're just some guy, and what does he know, and why is his opinion important? So I think you've answered that question sufficiently. All right, so I'm interested.
So let me go. Yeah, let me go on to the process of evaluation and punishment. So kind of monitoring. So when somebody signs up to evaluate and monitor politicians and other public figures, when that public figure, let's say I say something like 2 + 2 = 3, then they go to me and they say, oh, hey, did you make a statement? Did you violate the pro-truth pledge here? And with an innocent until proven guilty, maybe they misheard something, or maybe I misspoke, or maybe it was misreported, or something like that. If I say it on the show, same thing. So they go to me and they ask me that in private, and then hopefully we can resolve the situation that way. If that doesn't get resolved, if the advocate, the pro-truth pledge advocate, which is the name we have for people who are volunteers, if the advocate is still concerned, she goes to a mediating committee. Now, anybody can be an advocate for the pro-truth pledge. You can immediately just sign up right now, go to protruthpledge.org, click that you want to help when you take the pledge, and you'd become an advocate. People would contact you about the next steps. Now, there's a mediating committee is the next step up. So mediating committee is made up of vetted volunteers, people who we know are trustworthy and reliable. And the advocate would bring the information about, let's say, so I'm in Columbus, Ohio. Let's say the mayor of Columbus said something that's, a thing about, I don't know, how many garbage trucks there are in Columbus or something like that. And so the advocate would then not resolve it with the mayor, then the advocate would bring it to the mediating committee. The mediating committee would reach out to the mayor and ask the mayor to help clarify what's going on. The mediating committee is likelier to get a response than a single advocate, especially from higher profile officials and public figures, because the mediating committee has more pull. So the mediating committee evaluates the situation. If it still thinks that the mayor lied about the number of garbage trucks and the quality of cleaning up the garbage in Columbus, then the committee would call in another mediating committee to check, to make sure it's a very thorough process, to make sure that they don't have any biases and so on. If it's still determined that the mayor lied, and then the mayor has one last chance to retract his words. If the mayor doesn't retract his words, the mayor is now put from being alleged violation of the pledge to being in contempt of the pledge. Now that's the serious situation where we issue media advisories to all the relevant media figures. So if it's the mayor of Columbus, it would be everyone in the Columbus, all the media in the Columbus area, in the Central Ohio area. Then everyone who's signed up for updates to the pro-truth pledge by email or by text, not to the updates, I'm sorry, to action alerts, by email or by text, gets an email or a text or both, whatever they're signed up for, saying that, so everyone who's in the Central Ohio area gets that alert, action alert. The mayor of Columbus is now in violation, is in contempt of the pro-truth pledge. Not simply violated, whatever, that's not a big deal, but is in contempt of the pro-truth pledge. And that's a big deal. And we ask people to tweet the mayor, to email the mayor, to call the mayor, to write letters to the mayor, then do the same thing to letters to the editor, call the editor, tweet the editor, and so on, their local newspapers. All the media venues they can think of to talk about the mayor being in contempt of the pro-truth pledge. So that's a pretty serious media kind of, reputational penalty.
And so the reputation that you mentioned for the pro-truth pledge also has to be exemplary. It's got to be that when you determine that somebody is in violation of that pledge, that is an extraordinary claim, requires extraordinary evidence. I would say it's on the scale of the more serious, the more backing it has to have. I mean, for case in point, what typically happens with me is any time anybody disagrees with or misunderstands something that I said, they make a video about it. They don't ask me first for clarifying statement. Is this what you meant? Can you explain this? Just to make sure that they understand before they blow their mouth off. Instead, they make a video, and say, X nobody on the internet, some anonymous nobody says, destroys RN-Raw because RN-Raw said, and then you see the comment saying, but that's not what he said, or that's not, that clearly isn't what you thought he would meant, whatever. This is your misunderstanding. But this is not the way to go about that. You don't blow it up on the internet first. You don't, explode somebody on your blog post or whatever, and then find out, oh, that's the definition he's using, or that's what he meant. No, So what you're saying is, I like PolitiFact, for example, what I was said before, when they say that, that they disagree with this, the reason why is what's important, and it better be compelling. You have video, you have published documents that prove this statement. So, and this is what you're saying, you will have this, you will have that kind of credibility.
Absolutely. The reputation of the pro-truth pledge depends on each time we find someone to be in contempt of the pledge, which is like the big deal, for that to be like really serious. When we send out a media advisory on someone being in contempt of the pro-truth pledge, we would send all the evidence and all the processes that we went to. We would show them, the media, that we went to this person 5 times, whatever times, and asked them to clarify things, to explain things, to take back their words. And here, it's going to be very clear that the person lied, because we don't know why they might have said a false statement. A false statement can be just a mistake. Like I said, maybe I'll say that the current president of Russia is I don't know, Khodorkovsky, and it's actually Vladimir Putin. Oops, I made a mistake, right? Not a big deal. The prime minister of Turkey is Erkarazan, whereas his name is actually Erdogan. And that's not a big deal. I didn't lie. I made a mistake. Now, we know that somebody is lying if they had repeated opportunities to correct their misstatements, and they chose not to take advantage of those opportunities.
And they're still saying they've had repeated opportunities, and they're still saying that their tower is 5 stories taller than it really is, or that they still have the largest largest crowd at their inauguration, or that everyone will still get coverage, or that this will be great plan. So great.
Yep. Yes, exactly. So now we know that they are deliberately intending to deceive. And that's the only situation in which the pro-truth pledge is going to place somebody in contempt. And so anyone who's placed in contempt gets a pretty harsh media kind of reputational penalty. So if they plan to deliberately deceive people, they're better off not signing the pledge in the first place.
Yeah, well, I'm all about this. I've been saying for at least the last couple of years that we need to find some way of holding politicians accountable. Since this pledge aligns with my own philosophies, apparently, so far as I can tell anyway, I'm going to read it this evening. I will, of course, sign it myself, provided I don't find a flaw about it. And if I do, I'll publicize that too.
Yeah,
I'll
please
be
publicize it.
very open with that. So if you don't see my signature within 24 hours of this broadcast, there will be an explanation of my blog post as to why. Otherwise, my blog post will also, excuse me, but my blog post will also include that link. And I will include that the link to the blog post and to the signature below this video. All right, Mr. Tsipursky, did I get it right?
There you go, perfect.
Okay. All right, I want to thank you for being on. I also want to, we've gone longer on this than I normally do, but I have to say I was engaged by this conversation, by the topic, and by the implications of it. So I'm very much appreciated having you on. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close?
No, I wanted to say, the only thing I want to say is to encourage everyone to go on and sign the Pro-Truth Pledge, especially if you, Aaron Ra, sign it and include that in your blog post. I think it's very important to hold politicians and other public figures accountable. And I hope that you, all the viewers, all the listeners, will help make it happen.
Outstanding. All right, Mr. Tsipursky, Professor Tsipursky, thank you very much for being on the Raw Men, and I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Good night.